You alright? My name's Paul. I've got autism and I make random videos based on my version of autism and the way my head works, and I stick the videos on the internet just in case you fancy giving them a watch. And I hope you're doing alright. Anyway, a while ago, I put my channel in your hands and said, what is it you actually want to see videos on? What's on your mind? What would you want me, in my autistic waffle way, what do you want me to cover? And for those who don't know what I mean when I say the word waffle, in Manchester, waffle means talking nonsense or talking too much nonsense. And that's me. So whenever I refer to the word waffle, it's always about talking. And thankfully, you responded in kind. You gave me a lot of suggestions, which I appreciate. And if you've got any topics that I haven't covered and you want me to cover, send them to the inbox. And the email address is always in the description, but I always apologize that I can't respond to all emails. This topic came up a couple of times, and the ones which have come through as repeats are the ones I'm going to cover first because that's obviously more pressing. And this topic is very, very, very difficult to try and attribute to autism, and there's only a couple of things I can kind of pin on it. So I apologize that it's not really going to sound like a difference between autistic and non-autistic people, but it's to kind of share a personal story about something, very personal, and how it felt, and try and explain more towards the end about how being autistic, it made me feel, because at the time I didn't even know I was autistic, but I knew I was feeling different than everybody else around me. So I apologize, it's not going to be a full dissection of any type of autism. I'm just being honest up front. So I'll do the video in two parts. I'll tell you a very personal story, which I'll do my best to not cry about it because it's very emotional for me, but I've also built something in to bypass the part that makes me cry. If that makes sense. But if I cry, you know what? I don't care. Just, men are allowed emotions too. And then the second half is where I've got a few points from the person's email on the screen next to the camera, and I'll just I'll try and talk about them if I can get the time. Anyway, let's have a go. So, autism and bereavement, and how it feels. So, I lost my best friend when he was 32. He died of cancer. And, me and my best friend, we had a friendship that nobody else got. Nobody understood it. And I loved that. I loved that so much. Because, even his dad used to say to us, "You're like a pair of old women, you two. What can you talk about?" Because we'd meet each other every Saturday at 11 o'clock at the bridge. Because he'd come over one side of the bridge. He was always late. And we would walk into the sort of shopping centre, we'd get some food, and then we'd walk down to a place called Style, and we'd go through the woods, because it's a nice place to look at, and we'd sit on a bench, eat our food, and we'd just talk the day away. And people didn't get it because they couldn't understand what a couple of lads had to talk about every Saturday for about 5 hours each time. But we did. And nobody else got it. And I loved that. It was, for me, that mattered, that other people didn't get it, because they couldn't see that we had a selfless friendship where the only thing we wanted from the other person on that Saturday was to just spend a bit of time with them. We got something from it, where we had the strangest sense of humour, which other people didn't get, which, again, I loved that, and to give you an example of, and you'll listen to this bit and go, but that's not even funny. That makes it funnier for me, and what he'd do is, let's say I finished work at bang on 5 p.m. He would start texting me at about 4:58, 4:59, and he'd say things like, "Hi, Paul." And then another one would come straight through. "Hello, Paul." Another one would come through and go, "Are you ignoring me, Paul?" Then another one would come through. Have I said something to upset you? Next one would come through. And it'd just carry on and carry on and carry on and carry on for 2 straight minutes, one message after the other, to the end where it was like, I've known you for all this time and you ignore me, you pathetic piece of... And he'd just go on these mad tirades. And then I'd get my phone at some point when I'd finish work and I'd see like 39, 45 messages. And I'd be like, it's him again. And I'd open my phone up and there it'd be, this mad tirade of messages. And then I'd just respond with, hi, Mike. And he'd be like, oh, hi, Paul, how are you? And it was just stupid. And I'd do the same to him and I'd berate him, I'd tear him to pieces, and then he'd respond. Other people were like, well, why would you waste your time doing that? It's like, because we find it funny. That's why we do it, And it's like, it's not about everybody else. And that was one of the weirdest things. And it's kind of one of the things that made the friendship very isolated, but very good at the same time, because we were surrounded by people who didn't understand our friendship. Because it was just weird. That's not funny. Why would you? What on earth can you have to talk about for 5 hours every Saturday? Don't worry about it. You're getting bothered by it. We enjoy it. And like I say, it was a selfless friendship. Neither of us wanted anything out of the other apart from their time. And we got it, and it was great. And I love the fact that I had more time than I can even remember because it mattered. Because we were surrounded by people who, because of the age we were, it was like, right, you've got to get this job, you've got to get this car, you've got to be at this point in your life. We were like, yeah, you do that. We're just going to go and, drink a bottle of cherry Coke and chat nonsense. And it was great. It really was. And then one day he didn't show up at the bridge. And that happened every now and again because he'd get drunk with his other mates, like the night before, sleep in, and then, I'd end up going back home, and then he'd text me about midday, be like, I'm so sorry, I can be there in 5 minutes. So then I'd go back and then, just tease him for being late. And I ended up having to text one of his sisters because it was getting late in the day. I'd not heard anything. You do get worried. So it was like, I'm sorry to bother you, but, he's not responded all day. I just want to make sure he's all right. And a couple of hours later, she got in touch and said he was admitted early hours in the hospital. They had to do an emergency surgery and he's been diagnosed with bowel cancer. And it was like, okay, didn't expect that. Obviously, nobody did. And I'm not going to talk about all that side of it, but let's just say I never, ever, ever thought he wasn't going to beat it because I didn't know much about cancer, apart from it's a horrible disease. My uncle died of it. I think my nan might have died of it. Since found out my biological father died of it, but he smoked and then got lung cancer. Well, come on. I think it increases your chance of lung cancer by 284%. So he upped his chance and died of it. So, oh well. Didn't know him, so I'm not bothered. But it was, and this is what's crazy, is the death of my friend affected me more than my nan, my uncle, my biological father combined, because he was my best friend. And 18 months down the line, I never thought he wasn't going to beat it still. Things were changing. He was tired. He was grumpier. He was, not as available anymore. And, we still text every day. That was the thing. We were never out of touch. And then I'd been on holiday. And this is the hard bit for me to say. I've got to keep in mind selfless. But I'd gone on holiday and I'd come back on the Sunday and I'd, done what you do in the day. And then it got to the evening time and I was just sat at the computer like I always am. It's never going to change. And the phone rings and it's his other sister. So he's got 2 sisters and one of them used to take me and my friend to the American sweet shop because at the time you couldn't really get American sweets in England. And I wanted to get wild cherry Pepsi because it's better than cherry Coke. And I love cherry drinks, even though I don't like cherries. So I used to get, a crate of that. I'd pick up a couple of chocolate bars as well, like the 100 grand bar, which I don't think you can get that still in England. And we just used to try different ones, and then we'd be texting each other going, so what's a Tootsie Roll like? And, and all this sort of stuff. Because we might have been adults, but we just didn't have a care to fit into anything, so we did what we wanted. So we had a sister, or he had a sister that used to take us to the American sweet shop, usually when she was hungover. And his other sister, I only ever saw on the rarest of occasions if I was at his house and she might have popped round because she didn't live there. And, it'd only just be a couple of sentences strung together like hello and, how is everything? Hope all is well, sort of thing. So then the phone rings and it's her, the other sister. And it was like, what can I do you for? And I knew it couldn't be anything good. But bear in mind, even if he was in hospital, it was never because he wasn't going to beat it. And then she had this chat with me, and I went outside because for some reason I can't take phone calls indoors. I think it's because I lose signal every time I'm inside. So I always go outside to take a phone call, and I went behind the garage and I was leaning on this grey water, but recyclable water, but that was behind the garage. And I remember it as clear as day. I had these grey house socks on, these baggy, comfy, fluffy socks, because it was just turning into the autumn, which is the favourite time of year. I had this green long-sleeved top on with this little V cut at the front that I used to adore wearing, but that's gone now. And these grey sweatpants, which I still own, even though they're all misshapen and gross. They're just comfortable, so they're not going anywhere until they fall off my legs. And she said that there's nothing more they can do for him. They're exhausting the chemotherapy. It's not doing anything anymore. And this is kind of it. And I needed that spelling out for me. And I'm like, well, what happens next, sort of thing. She's like, well, nothing. This is it. And I was like, I was like, how long has he got? Expecting them to go, he's probably got about 5 years, 10 years or something. It was like, they think maybe 3 weeks. And you're like, how can that be real, And, obviously it made me sad. It made me upset. I cried a lot. And, I remember it started raining while I was on the phone. And you know what it's like when you've got socks on and you stand in a bit of water, it sort of boils your blood, you're stressing, you've got to get the socks off. And by this point, while I was talking to her on the phone, it was absolutely coming down. I was drenched to the bone. And I remember walking, after sort of got that initial cry out my system behind the garage and went back towards the house, and my socks were slapping on the pavement, like duck's feet, just walking back. And I was just, there was bigger things to worry about than a bit of water on my socks at the time. So it was, I just always remember that. I've got the worst memory in the world, but I remember that as clear as day. I could probably tell you how many leaves were on the bushes next to me. It was that vivid of a memory. And this is the bit that gets me. So the sister went back inside and went and seen my friend, and he says, did you tell him? Did you get in touch with him? She's like, yeah, I did. And he's like, and how did he take it? How did he take the news? And she said, well, he started crying. And when he heard that I started crying, he pulled the cover over his head and he started crying too, because the thought of making me upset him. And hang on. And the crazy thing is, and this is why I've got to focus on selflessness. The point of the friendship was selflessness. He was very selfless. We never wanted for anything off either of us. And this is the bit which I always trip over. He found out this news that they were stopping chemo before I went on holiday. And he didn't want to tell me because he didn't want to ruin my holiday. This was a guy who was probably told at the time he's probably got 5 weeks left. And he took up 40% of the life he had left to preserve my holiday by not telling me. So when people wonder whether they're selfless or not, that's the comparison. And that's, if ever you feel, I've had moments where I just don't feel like I matter, to people. It's like, I just go through the motions at work. I just do this. It's like, but the fact that there's words that can never describe that for me, And then, unfortunately, the 3 weeks were pretty accurate, and there was a missed call in the middle of the night from his sister, and I phoned her back in the morning, and she was, and I'll give her a due. She's cracking at telling autistic people bad news because she's just very matter of fact, and it was like, just to let you know, this time in the morning, Mike left us. I was like, okay. But she sounded quite relieved because obviously the cancer couldn't keep doing anything to him. And that's always the only positive, isn't it? When somebody passes away from something like cancer, is the cancer dies with them. We can't do anything to him anymore. So, there was always that thought in everyone's mind who cared about him. And it was very tough. It was very difficult, and obviously there's the funeral and everything to go to. So there's the first half of the video telling you about the horrible, in a very, very brief way, the way it felt, and or the story that happened. So to sort of relate that to the emails, because I never thought it wasn't going to beat it. That's the naivety in me. I just didn't think it was. What I know now about cancer and what I now know about chemotherapy, I would have known, but I was that naive because I didn't even look into it, Because I suppose to start to talk about the autism side of things is, they talk about routine, they talk about changes being very difficult for autistic people, and you start to see a change in someone who gave you a great familiarity of routine. I started to see him tired, and I started to see him grumpy. I started to notice he wasn't laughing at the things he used to laugh at, and his face was changing and things like that. And that was difficult to see a change because of the not rigidity in the way things are, because autistic people do accept change. It's just the change has to be for the better. We struggle when it's not, or it's not explained to us well. So I then became very conscious, not wanting my friend to see that I was being different. And even though I didn't know I had autism, I could feel I was being different because I was witnessing a difference. And I didn't want him to think I was being any different because he was now different. That wasn't the case. I just found it hard to adjust, not because of him, but because of the situation. Final days were hard. The funeral was even harder, and afterwards was the hardest. So, his sort of final days, I've always been a fixer. I've always been a people pleaser. I've always been someone who wants to help others. And I was now faced with the person, that you've known the longest, who you care about the most, and you can't do anything to help them. It's a horrible feeling because you don't know what to do if you can't help. Like I've had people phone and go, "Oh, I need to move house." I'm like, "When do you need me there?" Like, I'll just help you move. You haven't asked. I'm inviting myself. When do you need me? Just anything to help. And then you're faced with something where you can't help the people you care about the most. That's horrible. And I know it's nothing compared to what the person goes through. I appreciate that. I'm not after anything at all. I'm just sharing a story. But I remember, like, to give you an example of how bad it felt for me was where I used to live, there was a big piece of frosted glass in the bathroom, and you could see a street light in the distance. And through the frosted glass, it kind of looked like a bright moon. So every night I'd get up to the bathroom and do what you do in the bathroom. I could see this fake moon. And while I was looking at it, while I was doing the bathroom stuff, I always used to get hit really strongly with, he's not going to be here much longer. He's been given 3 weeks, and then that became 2 weeks and 1 week. And it was like this inevitable countdown for something you had nothing and no control over, which made you feel more and more anxious and scared and worried and stressed every day because, not for me, for him. Like, how must he feel if he's getting up for the bathroom in the night and he has that come around realization that, oh my God, I'm not going to be here in the next 1 week, I couldn't deal with thinking how he must feel. I couldn't deal with it, and it made me ill. It did, because I couldn't do anything about that. And that's where I strongly believe it gave birth to fibromyalgia in me, because it can be brought on by the death of a loved one. And I loved him to bits. You know, he's my best mate. And because I couldn't help him, I was just so lost. You know, and like when he finally passed away, I got twice as protective because I knew him. I knew him inside and out. There was nothing about that guy I didn't know. I knew his flaws, I knew his positives, his strengths, his weaknesses, the things that worried him, that didn't worry him. I knew him inside and out. And one of the things I knew he detested was insincere social media posts, or social media posts where it's like, give me attention over something that's happened. He despised it. We would mock it relentlessly. And then unfortunately, he became part of that when he passed. And I must have fell out with over 30 people who I still haven't spoken to this day by jumping right into the directs, instant messaging, whatever you want to call it. I'm not on it anymore. When they would put a picture of him up and they're like, R.I.P. Mike, heaven wanted an angel back. It's like, listen, you haven't spoke to him for 16 years. You don't know him. Get that stupid picture off. If you knew him, you'd know exactly he would hate this with every fibre of his being. And then they'd kick off at me for saying, so I'm just saying it's a shame. It's like, you don't even know him. You knew him at school. You've not spoke to him since. You don't know him anymore. You know, because if anyone was going to do that nonsense stuff, it would have been me, wouldn't it? It would have been his family. It would have been people who actually cared about him. But strangely, none of us did. It was these people who didn't know him anymore. And I ended up having this real defensive thing in me to stop it all happening. Because I knew him. They didn't. And strangely enough, like I said, they've all fell out with me for doing the right thing for him. Forget them. Forget them. Because my world revolves around, in the autistic world, respect, truth, and what is just. And I was being respectful, I was being truthful, and I was being just to him. They were after drama. Forget them. The funeral, though, and this is where autism plays a big part, because a funeral is still an event, isn't it? And I don't go to events. You know, I ruled myself out, especially after being diagnosed autistic. I don't do events anymore. The only events I actually probably do are funerals, because it's about paying respects to someone. I can respect someone I've not seen for 20 years, you know? But I don't go to birthdays, I don't go to christenings, Christmas events, anything. I don't do anything with family anymore. You know, they're good people. I just don't want to do the events. But a funeral is still an event. And whereas I can go to somebody else's funeral and just be a guy in the background wearing black. Now, this was my best friend I had to say goodbye to, knowing it was the last time I was ever going to be around people who were ever going to talk about him. And after today, everybody just carries on. But I don't. My Saturdays at 11 aren't going to carry on anymore because he's not here to meet me at the bridge anymore. And what about that person who I text every single day, sending stupid noises, stupid text messages, stupid pictures that we used to do all the time? I lost a huge part of me when he went. And I spent years, I'm not kidding when I say it, I spent 4 years still waking up every Saturday with an anxious feeling in my stomach going, I should be somewhere now. And I'd spend from 11 a.m. till 3 p.m. just aimlessly doing absolutely nothing because nothing felt normal. You know, I lost a lot that day. And you're at a funeral exhausted because you've lost someone and you miss them. Now, the thing is, the autism comes in and makes you then appear like a horrible person, because this is honest, what I'm saying now. You don't want to go. You don't want to be there, because whenever you're at an event, you're masking, you're being someone you're not. Whereas you've got true feelings and true emotions over someone who matters. You don't want to then put that mask on and still smile at people and go, yeah, I know it's a shame, isn't it? It's like, no, it's more than a shame. I don't want to be here talking to you about why it's a shame. I want to be at home, you know. I don't want to do the small talk. I don't want to be around others. The person passed a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and now I've got to relive it all over again here. You know, the only reason, obviously I went because you go to funerals, but I also helped carry his casket in, you know, and there's such a difficult time, and making the small talk afterwards at the venue to all talk about him. And the thing is, there was guys there from school who I'd not seen for years. So you make the rounds, say hello to a few of them, and what have you. Let's say there was 10 people there from school who still knew him from school. There might have been 2 of them who actually spoke about him. Like where you could actually connect over a story, connect about an old school story, connect over something. But instead they're just talking like, buffet's nice, innit? Hey, this is a wicked venue, this, innit, bro? Like, yeah, that's what we're here for, the free buffet. And to say that this is a nice building. Don't be an idiot. So it's very, very difficult because you are riddled with your feelings that you have. Because what needs to be appreciated when it comes to autistic people being the difference, because of course funerals, losing someone matters to everyone. If you care about the person, I appreciate that. But one of the biggest differences is because of that respect, that truth, that feeling of being just, is you get to know people. When you connect with someone, you know them to their core. You don't know them because it's a case of, oh, well, we're both working this type of work and we're both really successful, therefore we're brilliant and we tag team. Yeah, no, you know someone to their core, you know them properly. You know that person, that genuine person, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever, you know them. So that makes it really difficult because it's not knowing part of a person, you know every part of that person. And one thing that's very synonymous with autism, especially my version, because I can only talk about my version, is time isn't a great healer. It never dilutes. I can sit here now, it'll be 9 years in October that he's not been here, and I feel exactly the same now as I did then. Feelings don't dilute. If someone offended me 15 years ago and I see them in the street today and they're like, hey, mate, I don't say hello back, and they're like, you're not still carrying a grudge, are you? Blimey, get over it. It's been 15 years. It's like, no. Because what you said, you still said. And you haven't apologised, still. So it's exactly the same. The situation doesn't change. And people struggle with that with me. But it's tough. It's about respect. It's about don't do what you shouldn't do. And losing someone who matters to you when you knew them to their core and everything about your friendship was 100% genuine. Your connections with people when you do connect are so true and genuine with no ounce of anything apart from selflessness and, honesty and compassion for the person. Time is not a great healer. How you cared about them is how you will always care about them. And there was actually someone who upset my friend when he was starting to get towards the end of his life. And they were a so-called friend and they just stopped texting him. Completely. And he got very upset about it and told me and said, I feel like they've already accepted that I'm dying, so they're just going to move on and not put any more time into me. And it made him really upset. And I've known this guy since I was 3 years old, and I'll never forgive him for that. And I've never spoke to him since. So when you are autistic and you do lose someone, you lose the core foundation of everything you knew about that person. Time never gets easier. You do honour them as best you possibly can. And family have family. I appreciate that, and they can talk about it. But when nothing ever dilutes, you are forever stuck in your mind. The only thing that changes is you can only be shocked so many times that that person isn't here anymore. But the way you feel about them remains. So funerals can be, and losing someone you care about, that bereavement process almost lasts forever because you've got no one to talk to. And it still doesn't make it easier, but you do want to share it. But you don't want to be a burden on the family because maybe the family can't understand how you care equally as they do. And everybody else just appears to have moved on already. But like I said, it'll be 9 years in October and nothing's changed. His picture's up there and I'll always miss him. But anyway, I hope somehow that might have made a bit of sense. But if not, I apologise. And until next time, my friends, thanks for watching and keep smiling.